This is looking at an extract from the opening of the novel The Girl in the Moss by Loreth Ann White, with a particular focus on language analysis. So if you've got any questions that are involving you either practicing your literary analysis of a text that you already know, you can take these skills and apply them to that text. Or if you want to practice your language analysis skills for language papers or for forthcoming assessments or so, then you can also use this text. So I'm going to assume that you've read the whole thing, and if you haven't, just pause now and just take a moment just to kind of work your way through that. You might want to make some notes about phrases that stand out for you, about particular sections you think are effective, or about anything where you think there's a number of patterns emerging in the imagery. Now we'll look at this kind of section by section. So if we just make that a little bit larger, we can see the opening paragraph, and we're going to look at the language analysis side. So that, if you're doing British qualifications, the AO2 side of things, that analysis of language form and structure. So what you might want to be picking up on is in this opening paragraph, we've got the idea of twilight lingers. Well, lingers is a conscious decision. Okay, so we know that there's an element of personification there. So if we're focusing on getting our subject terminology in, the first annotation you want to make is personification, but we're never going to just feature spot. We're always going to try and expand that through to get those ideas of the effect that's created. So if you've got twilight lingering, you've got the idea of the sun going down, twilight the light doesn't want to depart. There's some idea of it kind of clinging on to those last vestiges of day. The idea that it's painting the sky deep indigo. So there's an artistry there. So we've got almost a sense of sensitivity and regret developing there, that the light doesn't want to fade, and this beautiful effect that it's having. We've got the colour imagery coming out, deep indigo, so that purpley pinky colour. And then it kind of mixes into the idea of tiny stars, pardon me, that begin to prick and shiver like gold dust in the heavens. So if you want to look at that kind of idea, straight away, obviously, you're going to pick out that simile, but then start to unpick the simile. Make sure in your answer you reference the subject terminology, but there's more to say than just it's a simile. So the idea that we've got something that's like gold dust in the heavens has these connotations of being precious, of being valuable, of being almost insubstantial, that idea of dust. You know, it's kind of difficult to hold, difficult to catch, fleeting. Gold has got those connections to precious metals, value, kind of something beautiful. But there's also a little bit of kind of continued personification. There's a little bit of vulnerability maybe coming out, because these stars, this cosmic imagery, would normally imply the stars are huge, but these are tiny. So a sense of vulnerability and I suppose pathetic in the true sense of the word, kind of, you feeling for them. And they begin to prick and shiver. So again, these are actions that you'd adopt if you were uncomfortable, if you were vulnerable, if you were at risk, potentially. So even in this opening sentence, we've got an idea of the natural world demonstrating this dichotomy between the beautiful and the vulnerable. Okay, so there is some positive there, there is some kind of slightly more threatening imagery. So it's cold, a winter's frost already crisp upon the breath of the late September evening. So again, we have the evening once more sort of personified, it's breathing, the idea that the frost is there. So a little bit of pathetic fallacy maybe, things are cooling, things are chilling. There is a sense of tension created as the world kind of cools down, or as the environment cools down. Again, sense of threat. We have mist rises wraith-like, so another simile. Mist, insubstantial, intangible, and a wraith as a noun is a kind of ghostly figure. Wraiths tend to appear just before or at the moment of a death in kind of supernatural folklore. So the idea that the mist is rising, can't speak now, mist is rising wraith-like, gives that sense of tension, possible anticipation, possible sense of something being ominous, something bad about to happen. And it's above the crashing white water of plunge falls. I'd pick up the onomatopoeia in plunge and crashing and the connotations of falls. Okay, so again, this underlying sense of violence or sense of threat. Fog hangs densely over the forest. Again, we've got mist and fog, this pattern of weather, which is kind of covering things up, creating a sense of mystery, obscuring people's sight, so you can't quite see what's going on. More personification, playing peekaboo with ragged peaks of the surrounded mountains. So this idea, ragged, kind of torn, damaged peaks, you have that kind of sharp K sound in it. So the sense of kind of the atmosphere or the surroundings are being mischievous, but also kind of hiding maybe a tone of deceit. Depends on how far you want to play that one, really, in terms of your answer and your interpretation. We get the introduction of our unnamed character, she, and a sense of peril and threat because we have slime-covered rocks. An eddy is one of those little kind of whirlpools you get when water's rushing past something that's underneath the surface and it kind of goes in a little whirlpool. That's an eddy. So we have somebody moving cautiously. So just in that paragraph, you've got quite a lot of material to be able to look at how the writer kind of creates an atmosphere where things are superficially beautiful, but there is a sense of threat underlying the scene. Moving on to the next paragraph, you have our character stopping, watching a cloud of small insects. The water is mercurial. If you think of mercurial, if you describe somebody as mercurial, that adjective means that they are volatile, they are kind of unstable in terms of their emotions. Mercury, known as quicksilver, is that idea of volatility and lack of stability about it. So the water kind of almost seems to be broiling, seems to be kind of bubbling, it's moving rapidly. And if you're going to talk about this and its connotations, you might want to refer to it as the adjective. Okay, piece is complete, and then we have that metaphor. It's a tangible thing. It's not a tangible thing. Tangible means you can touch it. Okay, so the piece is so complete, it's as if you can touch it. What effect does the use of that metaphor have? That feels akin. So akin means just like. So I'd argue that this is now going into a simile. It's a gentle blanket wrapped about her shoulders. Let's unpick this simile. What would a blanket feel like? Why has the author at this point decided this piece is just like a blanket? What are the connotations that you're going to unpick in detail to explain why that simile is effective? Now we move on to the language of fly fishing. And if you don't know what a fly is for fly fishing, Google it, and all of a sudden this will make a lot more sense. But you have got a girl who's standing there selecting these little bits of kind of artificial flies with a hook in them. And we become aware of images like her clenched front teeth, her focus, her experience. She has practiced movements. A silver hook nestles in the feathers. Again, that zoomorphism almost at this point, the idea that the hook is intentionally bedding down, hiding, making itself comfortable. It's for the purpose of deceit, for deception. They're designed to fool the trout into thinking the fly is food. And her confidence is kind of evident in this short monosyllabic sentence, a smile curves her mouth. So we have that focus, the monosyllables, the short sentence, all giving that tone of confidence or assertion. Moving through then, we have our description of this girl kind of casting as fly fishing. And again, if you Google a picture of fly fisher people, you'll see that they are generally kind of at the edge of a river, or they're in waders in a river, and that their lines are very, very long. There's a lot of kind of skill involved in casting in fly fishing. And so you have the great big balletic sequence of loops. So from ballet, think about connotations there: dancing, control, movement, discipline, beauty. Diamond droplets, maybe linking into the gold dust earlier on. And the plosives behind the punch of satisfaction in her belly kind of could imitate that kind of hit that she's getting from getting this cast just right. We then have a kind of strange change in the narrative style, and it's worth commenting on because we go to these kind of sentence fragments. They're very short, very blunt, mimicking the idea of, her heartbeat speeding up, her pulse quickening, this kind of growing alert, growing awareness. The three separate questions, the narrative starts to move into the girl's consciousness. We start to hear her own internal monologue, and her previous external veneer of kind of confidence and I suppose calm and being in control is then giving way to sharp, short questions and fear. And she starts to think she can no longer hear the others, she realises. So we end up with these much longer sentences as she starts to kind of consider and check through the vulnerability of her position. Maybe those longer sentences involving the speed of her thought and her rising panic. The minute we start getting dashes, kind of that pause, that fragmentation of her internal monologue, the jumping around of her consciousness. And they say she swallows, turns her head, looks up. Okay, so 3 there in terms of these movements using the role of 3. And again here, tangible, watching, malevolent. Okay, this idea of tangibility taken before is now reversed against her. It's almost like, the previous security, the blanket is whipped away, and now what's there is this kind of palpable, this touchable sense of being watched, sense of being surveilled. Malevolent implies evil intention from this sentient, this thinking presence out there. And we end on a kind of role reversal that's made explicit that she is now the prey. She was hunting the trout. The trout are hunting the insects. She is now being hunted. That idea at the end, she is prey, in this chain, kind of shows that she is part of this food chain, and it leaves the reader with that suspense and tension in terms of what happens to things that are in the food chain. Hopefully this has helped. Really, for this exercise, if you're focusing on language analysis, it's all about the how. Don't tell me what the story is of the extract. Don't describe what the girl's doing. Look at how Loreth Ann White, as a writer, is using these different techniques and tricks, and how these methods that she's deployed have become effective in this particular instance. So nice and specific references to the text, which would mean that any part of your writing cannot be cut and pasted onto another piece of writing. So no, the reader wants to read on. No, just creates tension. Creates tension because creates tension through. Okay, I hope this has helped. Bye now. Yeah, that's